Thank you for joining me again. In this video, I will be discussing humanitarian and compassionate argument applications. When a client wants to submit this application, this type of application is really a type of application where it should be left as a last resort. An humanitarian and compassionate application, also known as the H&C application, is a very difficult type of matter. In here, as it is the last resort, essentially means that there are no other avenues or options available to you, and therefore you're asking the government to use humanitarian and compassionate reasons to allow you to remain in the country. Now, you can demonstrate in your application the great hardship and prejudice that you may face should you be asked to return back to your home country. So adding documentation to prove this will help, such as the conditions of your home country, possible fear of persecution, and so forth. Also, try to include documentation that shows establishments in Canada. So if you've taken English or French classes to better your language skills, you want to include that. Or possibly employment opportunities, or if you're working in Canada, you want to include that as well. If you have Canadian-born children, for example, also include that. So the more ties you can demonstrate to Canada and the more establishments in Canada, the higher your chances of success with this type of application. Also demonstrating that you're able to support yourself. So bank accounts, RSPs, investments, and so forth. Include every single thing that connects you to Canada. In addition, you can argue, like I stated, risk of persecution, torture, or risk of facing cruel or undue hardship if you were forced to return back to your home country. You can add articles of the conditions of your home country, news reports, for example, UN reports, and so forth, to prove your argument. My suggestion is always to make a list of your ties in Canada and make sure that you include that in your submission, as well as supporting documentation, as well as get family members, friends, every colleagues to write reference letters to show that you have family, friends, and so forth ties in Canada. But also as many documents as you can possibly get together to prove that you cannot return to your home country, whatever it may be. An example would be one of my clients was she was a gay couple, and she was not able to return to her home country because the home country doesn't accept gay marriages. And so that fear of being labeled and possibly persecuted, these are the documents that you want to include in your application. Agency applications, as I stated, are very difficult. They are complicated. Highly advise you to seek legal representation with such a matter. And it's also not to be confused with an application that makes H&C arguments. By that I mean, if you're doing a spousal sponsorship application and there is some matter that is, for example, you wanting your spouse has a criminality and you want to include H&C arguments, that's different than having solely an H&C application through SDIC, which means H&C application is you're basically saying to the government, I have no other options, no avenues available to me, but I want you to consider approving my permanent residence under humanitarian and compassionate arguments or grounds. Versus if you do a application such as spousal sponsorship and include H&C arguments, the main application is still spousal, and you're just adding H&C arguments because of that difficulty that you're facing with that particular application. So those two are separate applications, they're separate things, so just make sure you don't confuse the two. I hope the session was helpful. If there's any other questions, you can always give us a call. Thanks so much for joining me.